Welcome back to Three Feathers Farm. I'm going to talk a little bit about our weed management. When we first started at this site 3 years ago, this whole site didn't have any specific weed that we know of until, of course there were weeds. There was mainly a lot of grasses that were here, which we know that it was consistently cut back from the prior owners that were here and created a lot of organic matter. However, as we started to break ground at this site the first year, we did notice that as we started to irrigate some of the crops with the water that we have through the drip lines, we were beginning to notice that field bindweed was one of the main sort of weeds that were coming up consistently. And in doing that, we were mainly doing a lot of hand or using a cultivator, which is also a hula hoe, to clean a lot of these bed tops. We ended up learning quickly from our first year when we planted several tomato plants the first year without any sort of plastic, that trying to manage manually the hand and cultivating component, we weren't able to catch up as quickly because we didn't have any capability of getting in with the tractor to clear out most of as closest to the plant that we could, even in the furrows. So we actually did end up losing a lot of our crop due to the field bindweed crawling up and pulling down the tomato plants. So it was something that we learned really quickly our first year. Second year, we ended up going with a black tarp sort of underneath our tomato plants, and that being so that we wouldn't necessarily have to be weeding them as constantly, and we would also be suppressing some of those plants. However, we did in our second year learn quickly that we could also, for some of the empty beds that were done with production for a new succession, we would undercut it with an undercutter that was on the back of our implement of our tractor. And so we would undercut that maybe about 2 or 3 times within the time period that we would then plant a new crop in. That would allow for the suppression of the field bindweed to not grow as quickly. And we were also noticing in the past few years, especially on our third year now, that field bindweed has been knocked down a lot quicker, and it's a lot less vigorous this year now that we're in year 3. But like I said, most of our cultivating for weed management has been with a cultivator by a hula hoe, and second of all, coming in with the tractor, we have an Alabama shovel that we use, and then a triangle, which is essentially just like a kind of like a scraper on the back that will clear out the furrow for us. We do have some like knives that are sort of like a J-shaped knife. And we have used those to cut into the side of our beds that are sort of raised. We're on 40-inch beds. And so those knives will get as close to the side of the crop, maybe about 6 inches away from the crop. And those knives will cut so that there's an ability for us to manage that weed as well. And those are mainly for our rows that we cultivate in. And yeah, those are sort of the mechanisms that we've been using for our weed management in the last 3 years. And like I said, in the first year, a lot of learning around what weeds existed in this site, given that we had no prior history or knowledge about what would grow once it would be irrigated, since this field had never been irrigated for 10, 20 plus years. And then as we began that first year, we were learning really quickly the amount of time and effort we were really spending on our weed management, which was exponentially a lot, to the point where we weren't able even to catch up. So these last 2 years have been really just perfecting our system, really understanding how we want to be more efficient with how we're using our time, and how can we kind of suppress them over time. I think In the next coming years, I feel like one of the things that we would love to sort of explore and continue to see if it will be of use is solarizing during our growing season. So getting a 40 inch long plastic that would go along our beds and solarizing it while it's not being in production, or putting them into cover crop during the summer, which we're doing this year, and we're seeing that it is suppressing a lot of the field bindweed. So we'll sort of too soon to really say, but I think that those are sort of like other tools we're hoping to like implement here as we continue to like learn more around the site and our weed management. We're using buckwheat as our cover crop in the summer. And so we know that it's tall, a lot of organic matter, so that when we do churn it to then plant something or just keep it on top, we're knowing that it will suppress a lot of the weeds underneath it, and it will also cover our crop, or not the crop, but mainly the soil in itself, from being solarized.